So normally I'm the doom and gloom guy. I'm the guy that gets up here and talks about regulation and how it's going to stifle the market and how many of these innovative things aren't going to work. But Richard Hart made a great presentation to be the doom and gloom guy, so I guess I don't have to take that role today. So as you can see from the title, and I think it was already mentioned, we have this, who here in the room, and I'll do the same thing everybody else, I'll ask a question first. So here in the room knows what an STO is? Okay, so who here in the room also thinks that that moniker doesn't make any sense? Nobody? Okay, so STO is the security token offering, right? So it's kind of like an ICO, if people know what that is, kind of like an IPO from traditional markets, and it's something that would be a regulated asset that is tokenized. Obviously, we've been talking about tokenization here for almost the entire day, so I won't, wait a minute. Everybody's been having problems with these clickers, me included. Anyway, so why? So the first question on this is, why has the STO market stalled? Or I would say, more accurately, why don't we have an STO market? And here's the reason. Everybody that's kind of in the STO market now, is recreating pain points of the traditional market. What do I mean by pain points? So there's only really 3 reasons why you'd ever want to tokenize anything in terms of an asset to be tradable. There's only 3. One, obviously, is a big one. It's a big one. It's liquidity, right? Traditional markets suffer from a limitation on liquidity. And that limitation is there for many reasons. Some of that is regulatory. Others is simply because of access. People simply don't have access to markets. Or some of those that access is set up with barriers. So institutions have access to that liquidity or that asset, but regular people, retail investors don't. And that's what, for the most part, drives a lack of liquidity in the markets. Aside from liquidity, we're talking about let's say probably one of the more, I guess, existential problems of the market, aside from just liquidity, is that we don't have a global market. We have a siloed market. If you're sitting in Brazil and you want to buy into an asset in Estonia, let's say you're a Brazilian citizen, and there's some great tech company here in Estonia, they just went public on NASDAQ, and you want to buy into that asset. Anybody ever try to do something like that cross-border? Ever try to buy an asset in another market that's not maybe Apple shares or something like that that are more commonly traded? It's not easy. You create something that's called the chain of custody. Basically, you have to go through multiple intermediaries to get to that asset. And if you're buying a small number of those assets, it might not even make sense to go through all those custody chains, all that chain, all those intermediaries to get to that end asset. And if you're buying a lot of those assets, it induces more cost. We had a great presentation earlier today that showed the cost of a bond issuance, right? So these traditional pain points are being recreated on the blockchain with many of the STO projects that we see now. Why? Because they focus on front end only. So STO projects try to make platforms for people to buy into either, let's say, natively tokenized assets, which is something we heard about today with the bond issuance, where an asset is tokenized from inception, which is a great start, by the way. But most people are selling rights tokens. So they have an asset, a traditional asset, that has all the chains of custody, no access to liquidity, all the same pain points that almost every other asset has that currently exists on traditional markets. And they simply create a token that is a right to that underlying asset. So instead of taking away the pain points, they're simply leaving them there and adding another layer of complexity on top of those pain points. And that doesn't make any sense. What is the reason then to actually go through a tokenization process? Well, there isn't one. At least isn't one that makes any sense. So again, everyone focuses on front end. It's front end, front end, front end. It's platforms where people can buy and sell. It's primary markets, right? The problem with that is that, again, it's not bringing in liquidity, right? Even with the bond issuance that was talked about today, we're talking about 9 countries. Obviously, there's lots of regulatory burden in order to try and go global. But at the same time, if you're only focusing on front end, and that's basically a primary market, and then possibly a smaller secondary market that's limited, that has a barrier into retail investors, what you don't have is the easy way to go cross-border, right? You need a way to be able to go cross-border, and to do that, unfortunately, you have to focus on infrastructure, right? Most, let's say, tech companies, and we'll get, let's say, TransferWise, your Revoluts, these large companies that have innovated, let's say, the banking sphere, do so by way of the front end. They still use all the antiquated infrastructure. They're still sending payments via SWIFT and SEPA and all these different, let's say, ways to move money. They simply created a GUI and a very nice interface. But that doesn't solve the problem. we're still using antiquated infrastructure. So in order to get to that next point, in order to actually see change, they call themselves, for instance, challenger banks, but they use the banking system. So they're not challenging anything. They're simply creating an ease of access, a user experience. In order to actually change, to innovate, to actually create something new and actually move from where we are today into a more innovative market, you need to create infrastructure, back end. So now the what. So how do we actually go from the question of why does the market stall? Why don't we have an STO market? Why is there no liquidity? So cross-border, that's how you open up liquidity. I talked about this briefly, but just to touch on the point again, you're talking about, again, there was a great presentation about a bond issuance in 9 countries. 9 countries is great, and those 9 countries in Europe probably hold, I don't know, 60 to 70% of the GDP in Europe. So that's a good start. But what about people in Africa, South America, Asia, that also may want access to these assets? That's not solving that problem. And it's not solving that problem because in the securities world, there's something missing from front end. You also need settlement. You need the ability, and this was talked about briefly, what we like to call DVP, which is delivery versus payments. So someone holds an asset, someone wants to sell that asset, and they have cash. Or let's say in a digital age or in this blockchain age, we'll call that a stable coin. You need to have the ability to cross-border across the globe to be able to take that person that sits in one region, take someone that sits in another region without any intermediate, so disintermediating the entire operation, where delivery versus payment for an asset to a stable coin can happen in real time. And that doesn't happen on front end. So disintermediation, we talked about this already. I'll give you a brief example of my Brazilian story. Right? So you have a guy sitting in Brazil, again, wants to buy into the next TransferWise here in Estonia. That's a publicly traded company. What does he do? He goes to his bank in Brazil and says, look, there's this really cool company called Company X in Estonia. I really want to buy into this company. Excellent product, excellent team. They're going to go places. The Brazilian bank says, well, we don't really have a relationship with NASDAQ in the Baltics, nor do we have a relationship with the NASDAQ CSD, where that asset actually sits. But we have a relationship with Bank Mellon in New York. So let's see what they can do. So they call up Bank Mellon. Bank Mellon says, oh, yep, okay, yep, NASDAQ in the Baltics. Nope, we have no relationship with them. But we do have a relationship with Commerzbank in Germany. So let's see what they can do. So they call up Commerzbank in Germany. And Commerzbank says, no, we don't have a relationship directly with NASDAQ. But we do have a relationship with SEB. Let's see what they can do. SEB goes to LHV. LHV says, yeah, we have a direct relationship with NASDAQ in the Baltics. Now you have 5, 6, 7 intermediaries that sit within that transaction. Each of those adding latency to that transaction, each of those adding risk to that transaction, because if any of those intermediaries are to go out of business, have any type of bankruptcy issues, you lose the claim to the underlying asset, or you could lose the claim to the underlying asset. So we need disintermediation. And obviously the blockchain, DLT, I'm sorry, not the blockchain, where's our Bitcoin maximalist? A blockchain or a DLT is a great way to create disintermediation. And real time. So if you can't settle faster, meaning in the traditional market, you buy an asset, takes 1 day, 2 days, 3 days to settle. If we can't do it any faster cross-border, what is the point of even doing it, right? So in order to get, let's say, all these things into one, we need to create a system. We are creating a system where you can get access to those assets. Retail customers can get access to those assets. Assets can be tokenized more easily. Again, great presentation earlier today, so I didn't have to discuss it so much about how assets can be tokenized in a more inexpensive fashion. It can be done quicker, and it allows you to sell to a broader audience. So just to sum up here, I'm trying to go quick, guys, because I know we're way over time, and I'm already hungry, so I'm pretty sure everybody else is. So who's actually doing this? There's a few players in the market that are looking to, let's say, create this blockchain-based CSD, or Central Securities Depository, a place where assets can be settled. And some of the big players are there, your Clearstreams, your Euronexts here in Europe. And you have a lot of smaller players that are looking to do it. You also have companies like SIX in Switzerland that by the end of 2020 plan to have some type of system for Switzerland. You have 2 entities in Germany, 2 of the big stock brokerage houses in Germany that are also looking to do this for Germany. Again, recreating the pain points that already exist. They're creating silos. They are creating companies that can do settlement locally, or maybe through maybe few jurisdictions. We don't even have pan-European CSDs in Europe. Even though we have the regulation that would support it, they don't exist. And a lot of that is because there's no standardization. A couple guys have already talked about standardization. But so just to end here, and if anybody has questions, they can definitely talk to me afterward. I don't want to bore everybody with lots of details, but we are working on this. We're working basically to create a global settlement system that can settle regulated assets in real time, cross-border, on blockchain, which can open doors to hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of market flow. You can compare, let's say, just the bond market globally, which is roughly a 100 trillion market. Imagine streaming that over a blockchain in real time. We're not talking about latent transaction, not 7 transactions a second. Actual ability to scale this to real time and have settlements so people can gain access to these assets that have never had access to this type of market before. So thank you guys.